Hey everybody, it's Bob from TNT Customs. It's TNT Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about our Y-Link arm. This pile of stuff I have on my desk. So this is a Y-Link arm for a JK. Get it in the right orientation. Yeah. There it goes. So that would be the driver's side. I know that doesn't make sense to you, but I've looked at a bunch of these, so I know it's the driver's side. This is the upper arm. It was in the Jeep. And these bushings are really tight, but that goes like so. Obviously that hits your factory lower control arm mount, that hits your factory upper. The red bushing is this joint here. This end is obviously the chassis. It would be in the Jeep, something like that.
Nice.
So Chuck and I were talking the other night, why a Y-Link? Well, we originally developed these on the Cherokee platform, the XJ.
What year?
Testing my memory. Late 2004.
Okay.
Late in the fall. There were some clearance problems on a Cherokee. Namely, the frame is like right here. So all of the current designs on the market had a lower control arm mount hung off the bottom of the unibody, which for those of you that don't understand unibody, that means sheet metal. So they had a 1/4 inch, the aftermarket was hanging 1/4 inch plate brackets, either small brackets, either bolted and or welded to sheet metal. So that would come off the bottom of the frame and work its way in a straight line to your lower control arm mount on the axle. Several problems with that. This mount system was hanging off the bottom of the frame, so it was begging to get ripped off of the frame.
Low-hanging fruit.
Right. It also transitioned from the bottom of the frame to outside the frame, under the frame. So you had up travel problems. You had it under the frame to the lower control arm mount through on that axle. You had turning radius problems. You ever looked at the other silvery lost strength because you had all this stuff bolted and or welded to sheet metal. So we scratched our heads and came up with an idea to move. It all was based around the pivot end. We moved the lower up. Don't need anything crazy. We take your current sheet metal, especially on the JK, the sheet metal transmission cross member. Support the tranny, you take that piece out, you throw it in a dumpster. Because it's probably bent or twisted if you've been wheeling your Jeep. We give you a 3-piece fabricated cross member that goes back in its place, that has the suspension mount in it, but the center section is removable. So if you have to, we've talked about this before a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the LJ. It's not a secret, we do general automotive repair, so we do maintenance. We work on our Jeeps, we do maintenance. Having to drop your complete suspension out from under your Jeep to R&R a tranny, change a clutch, what have you, in that part of the Jeep and the drivetrain, to remove any of that, your first step should not be to remove the suspension. That's just stupid. So we've designed that cross member where the center section comes out. My Jeep is a Hemi conversion. It has the 545 RFE in it, so the 3/4 ton truck tranny. It's a big tranny. We just had the transmission in and out of my Jeep earlier this summer. You pull the skid plates off, you pull the center out, put a tranny jack in there, transition to general automotive tech, pull the tranny out it comes, it's on the floor, do what we had to do, which was actually replace it because that one was destroyed. Put the new one in, put all the suspension back in, we were up and running in less than a day. And never altered the suspension. Of course, we do all of our work on a lift because we have those, but the theory is you could do this at home with a floor transmission jack, and little Johnny broke his leg or whatever in the middle of this process, you could leave the Jeep sit. It is all on suspension, just walk away from it. Nothing's going anywhere. So that's part of the mounting. Well, anyway, on the Cherokee, the problem we ran into by moving this mount high and tight into that belly pan system we built, we really had interference with a straight arm coming underneath the chassis. So my former partner and I sharpened our pencils and came up with this bent arm. It was essentially to solve chassis clearance problems. But as the idea grew, we started seeing other advantages. You can't really see it because it's laying here flat on a desk. In a Jeep, if you look from this mounting point to that mounting point, from this mounting point to the upper control arm, and from the upper control arm back to this point, it forms as close as we could get to an equilateral triangle, meaning even on all sides. The design of the day, I mean, this was 2004, so there was plenty of TJ, because the TJ came out in 97 with coil springs and people were building long arm kits and etc. The design of the day was to use your short adjustable, the theory was you put a short arm lift on your Jeep and hated it, and then they would hook you with being able to upgrade you to a long arm, and you would salvage your adjustable upper. So it made sense from a manufacturing standpoint, it made sense from a consumer not spending as much money standpoint. Problem is it sucked in practice. That upper, even though the TJ, XJ, TJ, ZJ, MJ, first generation Jeep 5-link are pretty short control arms by today's standards, they're still pretty long. So it put this pivot point clear back here. So instead of having an equilateral triangle, you had this real lazy triangle. Okay, it's just geometry, but it's just geometry. The problem with that long, lazy triangle, as the front end articulates, the farther you bring this point back and take that this way, it creates a bind point when the front end articulates. With the equilateral triangle, it is, we like to say, it cams over itself. Is there resistance? Can you feel it? Is there a hitch in the giddy up? Yes. There's just no way around it. But it's just a hitch. You feel it and it keeps moving.
It's not actually a stopper or resistance.
No, it doesn't limit your travel. We get a lot of discussion about, oh, my Jeep's got a 3-link. Good for you. You're king of the CTI trailer. Who cares? Does it work in the real world? The answer is yes. Not smashing a 3-link. The 3-links work. However, a 3-link is a single point of failure design, especially when you couple it to the factory bracketry. Typically they will put the upper link on the driver's side because it is the cast-in upper control arm mount. It's part of the differential housing. It is stronger. I have seen them rip completely out of the differential housing. I mean, let's face it, a Dana 30 and even the Rubicon 44s are all thin wall casting. They're trying to make them light to meet fuel economy standards. So they're thin walled casting. We've done destructive work on Dana 30s, Rubicon Dana 44s, both first generation and second, which would be JK. I haven't cut up a JL yet, so I don't know about the third, but it stands to reason that they're thin wall castings as well. We've cut them apart in our big bandsaw, and that upper top of your differential housing where that third mount, that upper control arm bushing is, you get slightly away from that upper control arm mount, and the casting is in the 1/8 inch thick neighborhood. They're very thin.
But the damage doesn't stop there.
Oh no. So some manufacturers say, well, then we won't use that. And there's reason to not run a driver's side. The exhaust is in the way. Drive shaft clearance for this end, the chassis end mounting. There's just so much stuff on the driver's side. So the simple solution is put it on the passenger side. Well, now you just hooked it to a sheet metal bracket. You do the math on how long it's going to last. So the aftermarket has stepped up with heavier brackets and blah, blah, blah. And it just, there's nothing wrong with a 3-link in a purpose-built vehicle like Chuck's. It's got a big Dana 60 in the front. It's got massive brackets put on it to withstand all of those forces. This kit drops right in on your factory bracket. We've had a few of the factory upper control arm bushings over the years we'll wear, but it's a wear item. Take it apart, punch one out, punch a new one in. You can get them at Napa. It's not a, oh my God, it's a Jeep thing. You can get those bushings at Napa. Same with this lower, that's a factory Clevite bushing. There's hundreds of sources for that. Napa's the easiest one, right around the corner. So the main advantage to the Y-link arm is the clearance. Like I said, this is in the chassis. Yay.
Above frame line.
Above frame line. Most people, when they first look at our Jeeps, scratch their head and try to figure out how the front end is actually staying in the Jeep. Because you start seeing it from this point forward. But this, you typically don't see because it's tucked up behind the chassis. That's a big thing if you're going to play into big rocks. There's nothing to hang below and stop your forward progress. Now, on the TJs, you got to pay attention because they're all a low pinion diff. It does put the drive shaft a bit in harm's way. But it's so far inboard on the chassis, it's still pretty hard to get to that drive shaft.
That's inherent of a low pinion drive shaft anyways, though. That's not really, that's not the suspension design, that's a low pinion. We fought that back in the day when we were swapping in Dodge and Chevy Dana 60s into CJs. It's a low pinion design. The drive shaft's in no man's land. You just built a robust enough drive shaft and let it rub on the rocks. So, yeah, I totally agree, Chuck. It's a low pinion thing. But all your aftermarket front ends, they're all high pinion front end, and it gets the drive shaft damn near parallel to this arm. So everything's up. Where that becomes an advantage, pretend that this desk is a big rock ledge. You can drop the front tire off and let it hang to try and grab traction. There's nothing stopping you as in a traditional straight lower arm. Look at a Jeep with a 3-link with any of the competitions, 4-link, radius arm, whatever, where they're running a straight lower arm, and if the Jeep actually gets wheeled, this whole bottom will be destroyed because it gets drug on things. Is that a big deal? Maybe, maybe not. If it stops you from making the obstacle, yeah, it's a big deal. People ask about flex. I don't believe in the CTI trailer. I think it's a gimmick. I don't believe in RTI ramps. I think they're a gimmick. I believe in real world results. We play a lot in South Dakota. Big rocks, jumbled big rocks. That move. And there are holes between said rocks that will swallow a 40-inch tire. So think about it. You're wheeling down that trail, those series of obstacles. and you drop a tire, so you have all this uncontrolled droop. Okay, that's cool. Makes for great scores on a CTI trailer, makes for great scores on an RTI ramp. Big deal. When you drop that tire in a hole, you have 3 tires wanting to go that way, and you have 1 wanting to go that way. Do the math on what happens. Axle shafts break, ring and pinions break, lockers break, or all of the above. All in one, boom, you're done. So with all of that being said, we still like travel. I mean, travel's a good thing. You got to keep wheels on the ground because that's where the traction is. So all of our Jeeps I typically build with a 12-inch travel front shock. They'll use every inch of that shock. Any more than that, your steering can't survive. I haven't put together a traditional steering Jeep yet with more than 12 inches of shock that doesn't bind the drag link ends. It's impossible. Even on full width diff, where your drag link is another 6 or 8 inches longer than a stock width differential. So within those realms of travel, the Y-Link arm works perfect, and it's such a simple install. We bill in the shop about 8 hours to install this kit on the front of a JK. It's literally unbolt what was there, bolt new stuff in, make a few fine adjustments, and send it back down the road. We do quite a few JKs where we only do the front and leave the rear as a short arm.
Once again, that's bolting.
Right.
Bolting.
So you can do this at home. The little brown truck brings you a box of parts, and by Sunday afternoon, you're back out in the woods again. You can see some miscellaneous pieces, so it kind of ties into what I'm talking about. So that's our male. We also do things different. It's no wonder everybody knows that. So this would be your lower control arm stub. That's 1 3/8 12. That presses into the tube. So if I take this apart, and I'm not going to unscrew it because we'll be here a while, but you can see that unscrews. Here's one that is apart. Finger out of there. So it's female. We put the female on the adjustable end versus putting the female here and the male on your joint. So all of the ones that are out there that have this configuration, male on the joint, they have a fairly short amount of threads. I'm old school. Still believe in the machinist handbook. Machinist handbook states 1.5 times the diameter of the thread is the minimum amount of engagement. What does that mean? 1 3/8 diameter, right? Mm-hmm. Shouldn't do math in public. So 1.5 times 1 3/8 is 8, 11, about almost 2 inches. You have to get a calculator out, figure it out for sure. So anyway, we'll go with 2 inches. You should have 2 inches of minimum thread engagement. So if I had a ruler here and we screwed this in 2 inches, that's pretty close. That still gives you 2 inches of adjustment. 2 inches is huge.
It's a lot.
That's 2 inches of wheelbase you can alter with this setup. When these go in a stock configuration, this here is collapsed. That nut is, we've done all the math and all the homework. This would be threaded all the way down. It would bolt into your JK stock. Well, now you can lengthen that almost 2 inches. There again, it's simple geometry. If this is the chassis and that's the axle, it's a radius, right? As you lift the Jeep, and it was really evident on the older kits for like the TJs, it wasn't uncommon to take a TJ that the factory said should be 93.5 inch wheelbase and have a TJ going down the road at 91 inches. Because as you lifted it, the axles came together towards the center of the Jeep. We started when we did that Cherokee way back one, and then the next one was the TJ that we finally released in, I think, late 05, early 06. We started at a 4-inch lift height because that was the most common, and built the arm to put factory wheelbase back in at 4 inches of lift. And then you could go up from there. As you lifted it, you could keep that wheelbase. Or if you stayed at 4 inches of lift, you could technically stretch your wheelbase 1.5 to 2 inches per end. So now all of a sudden you took a 93.5-inch TJ and you were up 97.5, pushing 98-inch wheelbase, and you didn't have to do anything. You just adjusted it. Our upper arm has that same amount of adjustment in it, which is technically overkill, but it does have a purpose. We have 4 inches of thread on this piece. This piece is 4 1/4. With the creation of that, there we can say it that way, of a high clearance lower control arm mount, this pushes higher in the chassis, so we need more adjustment here to keep your caster correct. We have enough room in these. If you wanted to, you could run double-digit caster.
There's that much adjustment left in
There's
them.
that much adjustment in them.
With still getting your thread engagement.
Yeah, and maintaining thread engagement throughout. We needed a little extra adjustment in here for our truss system, because we technically moved the upper control arm mount a shade forward of stock, so that arm has to get a little longer to reach that when you put our truss on. We'll discuss that at a future date when we talk about trusses, but so we use this big long adjustment. We use this adjustment in our track bars. You've got a ton of adjustment in your track bar. Pretty much buy one track bar and it will suit you through all of your inchitis. So you thought 3 inches was a good idea, put our track bar in, and next year you think you need 4 or 4.5 inches. Take the jam nut loose, adjust the track bar, it'll accommodate that much height change. Or you started at 4.5 and now you've realized that's way too tall and you want to shorten it, the Jeep up. Break the jam nut loose, shorten the track bar. So the last thing I guess I want to talk about is the joints that we use. We've been mentioning them for the last couple times we've been looking at Jeeps, and I finally have one all tore apart. And I cleaned it. This was an assembled piece. I took it apart. And the reason I did that is because we grease them when we assemble them. So I just lightly wiped the grease out so you could see that spiral. It makes a different color. It basically is a visual aid. So one of the things Jolene did a couple of years ago, we've been running Summit machine joints for at least 13 years, if not 14 years. And they've gone through some changes over the years. I've made suggestions to her because we've used them for so long. And one of the suggestions on her last redesign was to put, I don't know what she calls them, what the technical term is, but these grease, I call it grease ring. So as they machine these, they obviously have CNC equipment so they can program the cutter to make, it's a thread pitch essentially, but she can cut that spiral groove in there, and what that does for you is the pieces, so that's the inside view, what you're seeing. So you have that little gap between the races, and the greaser corresponds right over that gap. So you essentially will fill that cavity. I can't hold it square because it wants to slide around. But you'll fill that gap full of grease, right? Which at some point you run out of room to put grease in, so now you have pressure. So what them spirals do is they, I don't know if that's a technical term either, but they wick the grease down and around that spiral to coat the surface of the ball.
It's like grease channeling.
Yeah, it's a channel. There you go. Good call. So it really gets grease on all of the wear parts. You know, I've got these Y-Link arms in my JK. It's an 08. They went in early 2009. I've never changed any of these parts in my Jeep.
You also maintain them. That's
I
huge.
do maintain them.
That's huge.
about once a year, we blow the entire Jeep apart just for the sake of blowing it apart. You know, as a manufacturer, as a vendor, or whatever you want to call me, I'm out on the trail. One of my favorite t-shirts is "Broke Sucks." Broke sucks. Especially for someone in my position. I can't sell you a part if I'm broke, because you go, oh, his shit's broke. My stuff's not broke. We do take it apart once a year. We do check with a magnifying glass, welds. You know, we inspect the Jeep from one end to the other, and part of that is taking these apart, cleaning them. Simple, hit them with some brake clean them up, re-grease them, put them back together. That spanner nut screws in the end. You got enough hands. So that just screws in there. Get the thread to start. Well, I'm under the gun.
It's fine thread.
There it is. Still missed it. So when you finally get it to start, there it goes. Still missed. There. See? Finally goes in. Screws right in. There's a tool, and I didn't bring the tool in, but it's a spanner. It's got three pins in it that fit in the grooves, right? Put your torque wrench on it. Tighten it to 30 foot-pounds. And just like wheel bearings on a trailer or an old truck, you know, some of you guys don't even know what that is because all you know is unit bearings, but we used to have removable wheel bearings, and we had to set preload on them. Same thing. So you set the preload on it, click, it hits 30 pounds, you're in the middle, you're in no man's land. Well, you just keep tightening it that little bit until the set screw will drop in here. Now it's locked, it can't come apart, and run it for another year. Once every other oil change, I'll put 1 pump of grease in them. I see a lot of people, and this is true of anybody's joint that's a greasable joint, they pump grease and they pump grease and they pump grease and they pump grease and they keep pumping grease, and there's grease squeezing out and everywhere. Well, what that does, when it all squeezes out here along the end, where do we take our Jeeps? Dirt, sand,
Water.
mud, water, snow, sometimes all in the same day. So you got all this nice sticky grease sticking out here. What does it do? Is it collects a bunch of dirt, and as the joint articulates, it works that joint, works the dirt into the joint. These are a form of plastic. Grit and plastic don't play. These are hard chromed balls. They're bitching. Jolene does a really nice job on her chrome, but would you take a handful of sandpaper or a handful of gravel and go scrub your chrome bumper on your tow rig? No. No grit's no good. So 1 pump of grease, every other oil change, that's all you need. Excessive grease is detrimental to many things. So that's Y-Link arm in a nutshell. Hope you enjoyed that. If there's any questions, post them up, please. During lunch or after lunch, I'll sit down and answer specific questions. I guess one last thing we can talk about is material, and I didn't bring in a drop so you could see it, but this is 1 3/4 250 wall DOM. So they're 1/4 inch wall tube.
Not light stuff.
They are not light. In the 15 years that I've been doing this, I've had 2 fail. One was in a front end wreck at a sizable amount of speed, which all bets are off. It had a slight bow in it right here. That's it.
From a car wreck.
The guy rear-ended a stopped vehicle at like 45 miles an hour, and it had a slight bow here. The other one that has failed is T-Rex, and everybody that knows us knows T-Rex. T-Rex is a big, heavy, we're slimming him down, but T-Rex was a big, heavy JK. I mean, it tipped the scales at over 7,000 pounds. It was a big Jeep. To clear the 43s that were on it, we had to move the front end forward and do a bunch of custom work. So we had to add some length in here because we actually ran out of adjustment.
So this point was even longer than what this arm is. One of his arms had a slight, you had to put a straight edge on it to see it. But it had just a slight bow right through here. Those are the only two failures we've ever had.
In how long?
On a Y-link arm since 2005.
I'd say it's working.
There are a boatload of them out running around. So the next time you see a Jeep that you're not familiar with and you look at the side of it and you don't see any control arms, ask them if they're running a TNT suspension, and I'll bet you they'll say, yep, got a Y-link. That's a telltale way to pick out our suspension, that and this hammered gray powder coat. Everything is powder coated now. When we first started, they weren't. They shipped raw, but we powder coat everything now.
So ready to install, painted, bolt on,
Right.
and it works.
For you guys with the TJ, the way that this joint configuration, I should have brought one of them in here, but I didn't. The way that helps you in a TJ, because the TJ is a very stretchable wheelbase, if that's a way of saying it. We have a kit that moves the steering box, moves your track bar, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden you can add 3 inches of wheelbase to your front end like that. If you already have our suspension, you call us up and tell us you're going to do the stretch. We will send you one of these that this tube assembly is 2.5 inches longer. There's your 3 inches of stretch. Screw one end off, screw one end on, the front end goes forward. It's not quite that easy, but in a nutshell, that's how you stretch your Jeep.
Nice.
We can put them stretch ends on a JK if you can figure out how you're going to deal with everything that's in the way to move your front end 3 inches forward. By all means, if you want to try, we can put the longer ends on the JK arms. We can put them on an XJ arm if you can figure out how to move everything that's in the way when you move the front end 3 inches forward. So that's the main reason we are 180 degrees from the rest of the aftermarket. We are male female, where they are female male. Because making this any longer, it will fail, and that would be the only way to stretch that style of suspension, is to have a shank on your joint that's 6 or 7 inches long. It's a failure point. These will fail. So the dogs are whining at me. They're ready for lunch. I guess we'll wrap it up because I tend to ramble.
Right on. Well, thank you for explaining us the fire and the points of that. And if anybody has questions, please let us know.
Yeah, post them up in the comments.
Lots of
will
good
answer them.
shout outs about how good their Y-links are doing.
Thank you.
Right on.
So,
Well, we'll see you next week.
yeah, we'll see you next week on Tuesday. If anybody's out in Colorado this weekend, keep an eye out for Mary and I. We're going to Mile High Jeep Club's Aspencades, so we'll be in the Kenosha Pass neighborhood with Yeller. If you see us, wave, stop, say hi, whatever. We're just gonna disappear for the weekend.
Sounds good.
See you next week.